Okay, so we've got our basic composition created here using the nodes that were generated, or the renders that were generated in Maya. We've brought them in using read nodes, and then we've used merge nodes to combine our 4 different read nodes together. Um, the next step would generally be adjustment. So if this constitutes the entirety of your scene, which it may or may not, uh, there are many other layers that we could use to enhance this and make it a deeper, more robust composition. But for just learning the process, this is pretty much the bare minimum you'd need to get something like this going and have some level of adjustment over some of the major components. So in the last video, I mentioned that the shadow and the darkness that's created by the ambient occlusion feels a little bit too much for me, and I don't want it to be quite as dramatically black as it is right now. It's pretty much pitch black underneath the car here. But if you look at the rest of the file, when it comes to matching a CG element to your background image to something that was shot in real life, you're forced to match the darkest pixels of the image, and if the car has differing information, it's not going to look realistic. And so really, if I zoom in here, this is the darkest part of this scene. This is underneath this trailer here. That's the equivalent of being underneath the car shadow wise, and look at the difference. This is kind of gray, charcoal. It's not even that dark a gray. So this image is a little bit washed out based on the exposure of the camera and so on and so forth. So if I have a car that's in this scene that has pitch black dark shadows and they don't exist anywhere else in the scene, it doesn't make visual sense, and we're going to need to adjust that. So one problem is definitely the shadows, but another problem is the car itself. Again, if I look at the tires in this trailer here, they're a dark gray at best. My tires are definitely black, and it just makes it look like something's off. So let's just tackle this one problem at a time. First, I'll tackle the ambient occlusion. So this is the simplest thing to adjust, especially if you're using merge. Just like you can adjust opacity in Photoshop, you can adjust the opacity, or what they call the mix, in a merge node to pretty much dial it down and make it less intense than it is, or make it more see-through. So if I double click on merge, the AO merge, I'm going to bring it to the top. Now, before I do this, I just want to point out something in the toolbox here. This is starting to get pretty filled up because every node that we generate ends up getting added to the list. Our project settings are still listed there. This can get fairly full and keep building and building and building, and it can get confusing because there's so many different bits of information visible here. So you'll notice that whenever I want to change something, I always double click first. So and the main reason I do that is no matter what's listed here, if you double click, it'll always bring the one that you've clicked on to the top. Single click doesn't do it. A lot of people make that mistake. They'll single click on the shadow background merge, not pay attention up here, noticing that AO merge is still on top, the shadow background merge is still down here, and just automatically single click and then start changing settings, and all of a sudden your comp is broken because you've changed the settings in the wrong node. So keep in mind, you have to double click for it to jump to the top. The other option, if this is just getting too much for you and you want to start fresh, this white X here, that's the clear button. Remove all panels from the control panel bin. If I single click that, all the panels are gone. Doesn't delete anything. All the nodes are still here. It just clears out the bin and the tool bin so that you don't see any of the settings right now. Then the cool thing about that is you can just look at them one at a time. If I double click on my AO merge now, it'll only bring that into the list, and I know for a fact I'm adjusting the parameters in the right one. So you can click this as much as you want, and there's a hotkey there, Control Shift A, to do it on the keyboard. But don't be afraid if this is just getting too much to delete or clear, not delete, clear the bin by clicking on the white X there, and then double clicking on the one or ones that you need. So having it cleaned out and confident that I'm looking at AO merge, I'm going to come down here to the mix value. That is the equivalent of opacity in Photoshop. And it's just 0 to 100%. So if I zoom in on the shadow here underneath the car and dial this down, you can see the ambient occlusion is getting fainter and fading away. If I bring it to 0, it's turned off. 50% is half intensity, so on and so forth. So it goes from 0 to 1, which you can equate to 0 to 100%. And I'm just looking at the shadows in the background and trying to visually match that. Keep in mind, the farther things get away from the camera, especially if it's a hazy day, they may get washed out a bit more. So I'm going to just make the background and the underneath of the car just slightly darker than what this is back here. So I'm going to go to about 70%. So that's not too bad, but I mentioned the car earlier being a little bit too intense. It needs to be washed out a bit more. Again, compared to the background, the dark areas in my car and the colors even are so saturated. I need to adjust that as well. Unfortunately, I'm going to double click on the merge. There it is. There's no setting here in merge that will allow me to correct that. If I try the mix, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up with a ghost car, because again, mix is opacity. So if I turn this down, it's going to make the car see-through, which I don't want. So for operations that aren't built into the node you have, your only other option is to build a new node that will allow you to adjust the data that you need. And we're going to do that in the next video.